So then, without any further ado, David Johnson, Senior Director of Global Sourcing, Software Category Transformation at News Corp. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you, Kelly. And just for
You
everybody who's listening, I just want you to know Kelly was very gracious and she took the hit for me. The real reason the previous platform went down is because people saw that I was talking and it broke the internet. Just saying.
Oh, no way. No way. This is the age of being laid back and rolling with it. This is all that resilience and agility we've been talking about for the last few years.
Exactly.
But for the next half an hour, we get to immerse ourselves in an equally sticky topic, safeguarding business data in a digital age. So we're going to spend the next bit of time talking about, and also, please, audience, participate, share your comments and questions. I'll be watching. Those should pop up on my screen here. But we're going to talk about the value and security requirements of the data that so many of our platforms need in order to have business impact. So, David, we've done a ton of talking today, not just about digital platforms in general, certainly how they apply to procurement, but how things like AI have really started to change the way we think about and apply technology. So, I'm curious to get your perspective as somebody who specializes in IT procurement. How have you seen the role of data use in business change during that time?
I mean, just for some context sake, I've been in IT procurement since 1995. And data went from a couple of million terabytes a year to what we're doing now, 123 zettabytes of data created in a year. That's a trillion. One zettabyte is a trillion gigabytes, right? That's a huge explosion in data. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, data was an output of your business practices. Your transaction data wasn't really valuable to anybody else but you and your treasury department or maybe your AP team. But now that's valuable data to some other forces, right? Now that data is not just it's transaction data, it's your customer information data, it's your operational data, it's your sensor and IoT data, since you guys have been talking about AI all day, right? And then it's all that unstructured data, your emails, your videos, your social media posts. That's valuable. It's a gold mine of information for people who are looking to steal your IP or get into your business environment, because that's helping them understand market trends. It's helping them understand customer sentiment. And that huge volume of data brings tons of value to your organization, right? It allows you to personalize the marketing to your customers. It allows you to do things like predictive analytics and, understand whether or not this week you should buy more stuff to make pumpkin spice lattes because it's cold, right? And it enhances the customer experience overall, right? We all look at Facebook and then we get an email about something, or Facebook puts an ad up. That's an enhancement that's due to all the data analysis that's being done on the Meta and Facebook platform. Then that becomes a new revenue stream for you.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the clear things that have happened is that corporations and organizations are really more aware of the value that their data can bring, right? If you work in pharma, you know that the results of your clinical trials can be sold as a new revenue stream. Patient information, which, de-identified, has value.
Yeah.
And these are all things that, honestly, if you go out to the dark web right now, you can buy.
Yeah, which is really scary.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go out on a limb, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this. I'm going to generalize and guess that in most cases, data gets created as a byproduct of some process or transaction. And then somewhere down the road, someone internally or externally figures out that it has intrinsic value. Is that the way that it tends to go, that we're just going about a process, using a system, and then somebody realizes, oh my gosh, we've created this incredibly valuable resource. Let's start to think more purposefully about how we can apply it within the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Really forward-thinking leadership tends to look at every aspect of the organization and every aspect of the business outputs that are created as potential revenue streams. And that's the way it should be, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't just use our data for internal things. There's always a possibility that that data can be monetized in some way.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because we have talked a lot about AI today. And in all of the conversations, we've been talking about some very exciting futuristic thing. And then inevitably somebody says, but if the quality of your data is not where you need it to be, none of this exciting new stuff, none of these new applications are going to work for you. Are we getting any better, any more mature around understanding and improving the quality of our data? Or is that still kind of like a lagging thing where we find an application? So we've created the data, then we find an application, and then we realize, uh-oh, it's not good enough to do what we want it to do. And we find ourselves trying to clean up. Is that kind of still the process?
Yeah, I think in a lot of digital transformation or innovation projects or programs, a part of that is cleaning up the data, right? Everybody knows the saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
So project managers and program leaders have that in their work stream to make sure that the data that's flowing into whatever new system is as clean as possible. So we can get those innovative and actionable insights when the product goes live or the program goes live.
Yeah. Now, you focus specifically within IT procurement, and we've talked a little bit about how the technology itself and how your role has changed since the 90s when you started working in the role. How has sort of that corresponding relationship with IT generally as a function in the company, and then also IT security specifically, if that additional team is there, how have you seen the relationship between them and procurement change over that time?
Um, I think I live in a unique world. I'm a tech geek. I am 60% tech, 40% procurement. So for me, sitting with the tech guys, talking to the tech guys, talking to my vendors, and bringing ideas from
Yeah.
the overall environment is a part of my job. So I'm a little bit different in that way. Um, but overall, especially in IT security, cybersecurity, there's been an explosion in funding. Like
Okay.
cyber gets money. Organizations are so afraid that they'll end up on the news because there was a
Yes.
breach, that they'll have to pay their customers because of a breach, that their insurance rates will go up, all of that stuff, that the focus is on limiting attack surface availability, training their people to identify phishing scams and not be victims of social engineering. So, in my experience, over the last 5 or 6 years, it's been a huge focus for leadership to become more secure from
Mm.
cyber attacks and the like.
I actually love the fact that you talked about training and education, because I think that's one of those areas, and it certainly expands beyond procurement, where we can talk about almost any initiative, and that area is lagging. I've certainly had conversations around sustainability, for instance, hugely important initiative where people are given objectives, given goals, given responsibility, even, but the education doesn't keep pace. I almost wonder if the risk and the concern around IT and data security is so acute that maybe that's what's made, because I know exactly what you're talking about with those sort of fake test emails to see if somebody will do the wrong thing and click on the link, even though we all know you're not supposed to click on the link. Do you generally feel like the education around what to do, what not to do, how to keep that data protected has been sufficient? Or is there always more that needs to be done?
No, you generally go through one cybersecurity training a year. It's
Okay.
25 minutes of you watching a video and answering a couple of questions. And it doesn't talk about the things that you're actually going to see. Yes, you'll see phishing emails, but you know, It doesn't tell you that you might one day get a text from your CEO asking you for specific information. How the heck your
True.
CEO got your phone number is irrelevant, right? There are so many ways that bad actors are attacking organizations, right? And you have to think about what they have behind them versus what we have to defend against them, right? Um, we can talk about China and Russia's dedicated hacking programs. You can talk about all the
Yeah.
various hacking organizations with hundreds and hundreds of people who are attacking your network, who's got like 7 guys in cyber trying to protect it.
Yeah.
It's a huge, there's a huge difference between what we're seeing on the attack front and what we've got to defend it. And when you talk to cyber guys, they're very jaded because they think we're the problem. I've been told 100 times that I am the weak link in the chain of
Oh no.
cybersecurity because we are like we as people are the way in most of the time, you
Yeah.
know. But for us in sourcing and procurement, our focus has to be on looking at not just our suppliers, but our suppliers' suppliers. That
Yes.
second tier, that third tier, those are also huge sources of breaches. You look at Target. Target a couple of
That's
years ago
right.
had a huge breach, not because they did anything wrong, because one of their maintenance guys let in a Trojan horse, and voila, now millions of people's credit card information is out on the dark web. Um, Understanding your supply chain, pushing through um, from your contractual obligation the way you need data secured as opposed to the way the vendor offers it to you,
Yeah.
and making sure that that goes from them to their suppliers suppliers, and then enforcing that with regular audits, with uh, things like your QBRs and your supplier relationship management activities. Those are all things that you can do to continuously evolve and continuously monitor your security posture as an organization and as a procurement person. Because
Yeah.
believe it or not, you're one of the gatekeepers of cybersecurity. You may not think you are, but you are.
Yeah. Now, I guess let's be honest, and this is probably a super common case. I know I've done this, so I'm going to put myself right up as the example of what not to do. I've run enormous RFPs. IT says, we want you to put this section about InfoSec into the RFP. I dutifully build out their section of the RFP, collect all that information, make sure the suppliers fill it in. When they all come back, I'm focused on their capabilities and their pricing, and I bundle up all of those InfoSec responses and I send them off to IT and I
Right?
say, here you go. I did what you asked, as opposed to starting to dig through it. If I start to think of myself as a gatekeeper, obviously that type of approach is not enough. And yet it's always a balancing act because there's so much information that comes in all at once with an RFP.
Yes.
If we had to start to try to boil it down to something realistic, what are some of the key things that procurement really needs to know? And I know you talked multiple tiers into the supply chain, but if we just stay with tier one, what are some of the critical things that procurement should want to know and understand about how suppliers are managing data security?
If I had to boil it down to just a couple of bullet points when you're looking at your response to an RFP or if you're looking at a contract, um, we'll start with an umbrella, right? A little bucket. Under data security and privacy, you want to know what certifications that they have, right? Are they ISO 27001? Can they share a SOC 2 report with you and your IT security team, right? That'll give them an idea of the security controls that the vendor puts forth. Um, are they compliant with GDPR,
Mm,
CCPA, HIPAA, PCI, whichever regulation is important to your organization? You want to make sure that they are willing to attest that they will comply with those regulations and any laws of any of the jurisdictions that you work in, right? It's a little bit different in Brazil than it is in Australia, yada, yada,
absolutely.
yada. If there's a breach, how long is it going to take them to tell you? Some people say 72 hours. Some people say, 3 days or a week. You want to be notified in 24 hours so that you can then notify your customers, your business partners, whoever it is. How do they control access to your data? Access control is important. Who's got access to it? Are their facilities secured in such a way that like 3 guys and the CEO can get to your data if you need it? And then finally, encryption. How is the data encrypted in transit when it's coming from you to them? How is it encrypted when it's stored in their data center or in their AWS instance? Those are kind of the key things that you want to look at in your contract or in your RFP response, right? If you get the right answers to those things, you'll probably be okay.
Okay.
Right?
Now, to what extent is it, and I'm sure this is going to differ by type of software, type of data, all that kind of thing. But to what extent is it enough to say, do you have these certifications, or what is the time frame for notification of a breach versus we require that providers have this certification? Do you? Yes, no. We require notification on such a time frame. Can you meet this? Yes, no. Should we be leaving things open and allowing them to come back and tell us what they have, or should we be trying to set those expectations right up front in the RFP process to say, okay, let's assume this is a base or average expectation, which providers tell us right out of the gate without comments that they can meet that requirement?
One of the key aspects of making that decision on how far you have to go in security is the type of data that will flow into the system, be stored in the system, or they will have access to, right? If it's generally available data, then that kind of doesn't matter because you can find it publicly if you look someplace else.
Yeah.
If it's restricted data, email addresses, just stuff that you generally wouldn't want out in the public, in the public eye, or it's not publicly available data, then you don't need the top level of security. You should review their SOC 2 controls, but you don't have to put them on a dedicated cyber program where you review their security audits every year, review their SOC 2s every year, and have to go through the backup and recovery drills every year, right? But if it's confidential data, you
Yeah.
got HIPAA data, PCI, personally identifiable information, any IP that you absolutely positively want to protect, then you got to go through everything. You got to go
Yeah.
fine tooth comb and make sure that there are no gaps because your data could easily end up someplace you don't want it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things we actually heard in our first session, which was completely focused on AI, was keeping in mind that in, different types of AI tools, but even thinking about a generative AI or something where you're putting in information, sometimes data, and then
Mm.
something else comes back to you, remembering that that means your data is running through a tool, a process,
Yes.
code, and it's possible that some amount of residual something that you wouldn't want out there is remaining outside of your company walls simply because you're using this tool. I
Yeah.
know everybody is very excited about the potential of AI, but what sorts of conversations, or to our other point, education, need to be happening around, yes, okay, here's the benefit of using this new tool, but let's just stop and think, what does that mean we're sending out somewhere and bringing back, even with a positive ROI to it? How do we have those conversations internally to make sure all the voices that need to express concern, ask questions are at the table, just to make sure that the benefit outweighs the risk?
So I am probably one of the few people who have a negative view of generative AI from a corporate perspective. Right? If you look at the end user license agreement for OpenAI, it strictly says your data is now my data if you use
Yeah.
this. Right? Um, from a provider, software supplier standpoint, there are a lot of people who are using GPT like functionality within their products, if not now, within the coming years. Salesforce is doing it. They've got Slack GPT and Tableau GPT.
Yeah.
Uh, Workday is also going to have GPT like functions. The challenge is they all use the OpenAI API,
Okay.
which is then again, OpenAI getting access to your data. it's important that we as procurement folks understand this, right? You have to learn the technology if you're going to negotiate with these people, if you're going to be a part of the AI, GPT, generative AI revolution.
Yeah.
Uh, so to get back to your question, I think it's absolutely imperative that we get that understanding of how that data is going to be used, and we limit it to only those things that we're okay with being in the public domain.
Mm,
Again, we go back to those three tiers, right? Is it
yes.
publicly available or not that important? Is it restricted data or is it strictly confidential? You don't want any of that stuff out in the world.
Yeah. Now, we've talked a lot about the company's own data. We've talked a little bit about working with tier one suppliers. But I do think your point earlier is important about thinking about how does that then reverberate down the chain? What does it end up looking like for procurement to have a conversation with a tier one supplier to then say, either what do you ask or require of your suppliers, or given this specific type of data, because I do like this idea of focusing and saying this data is confidential, it's IP, it's very sensitive, targeting a few suppliers that might have suppliers coming into contact with that and saying, let's go talk to them together. How does that expansion into tier two and beyond typically work operationally?
So it starts with the contractual obligation that the tier one supplier will take your requirements and pass them down and also enforce those requirements to their suppliers down the line. As part of the security audit process, you can ask your supplier to mutually audit at your expense their suppliers. And generally, they're like, "You're going to come with me? Okay, let's do it. I have to do it anyway." Um, so, I've in my experience, especially with some direct items, that process is really very valuable and really very helpful to the supplier themselves. So they're more than willing to accommodate this weird ask, you know,
Yeah.
and it helps because it absolutely opens up the dialogue between supplier and their supplier, between us and down the line, on what our expectations are and where their vulnerabilities might be that they didn't think about.
Yeah. Now, we've talked a lot about, and I admit it for myself, right? Passing along the InfoSec questionnaires. We've talked a little bit about asking suppliers things or having those conversations into the supply chain. But it seems to me that there are probably some active things that procurement should be doing to ensure that data is kept secure. Beyond asking good questions, bringing it into negotiations, including it in contracts, are there some active things that procurement should be doing, either working with stakeholders, making their own plans, or working with suppliers to make sure that we're playing an active role in keeping data safe?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with your first conversation with the stakeholder. Hey, you've got this new thing that you want to buy. What kind of data is going to go in it or go through it? Oh, you don't know? Go find out. Let's make sure that we're
Yeah.
not exposing something that we shouldn't be. Um, Especially with the generative AI discussions, right? Are there AI factors, that you want to use down the line? Maybe not right
Mm,
now, but are they going to do that in the next version, the next iteration? So let's build into the contract that they have to protect our data in the event of an AI integration or some new AI product added to it. Um, and then we make the clear distinction that if it's the OpenAI API, we cannot go to that. Um, Engage with your cyber team early because they're the guys who are going to. You may get a questionnaire from InfoSec, but that questionnaire is going to kick off a whole nother set of activities, a whole bunch of different conversations that could quite possibly delay
yeah.
and at the very least delay your execution. But getting their sign off early is really important,
Yeah.
and getting them access to the suppliers cyber contact is really important.
Yeah. And I imagine in some cases, I know we've had a lot of other conversations, especially around managing SaaS, different kinds of business apps. Procurement may actually find out someone managed to sign up for something and has been using it, and data has potentially gone outside of the company even before procurement finds out. And
Yeah.
so being able to ask those questions, even if somebody comes back and says, oh, geez, I didn't realize I've been using this for a while, procurement needs to have the knowledge and the expertise then to, okay, we're all going to stay calm, but let's contain this. Let's understand what's already happened. Can we stop it from here going on? Because
Yeah.
it's certainly in a provider's best interest, but they do make it really easy to sign up for these things. The price points
Absolutely.
are just right. There's minimal requirements to sign up for things. And it's sort of it's a little bit of friction where the user experience is wonderful, but if you come to it with a data mind, like you talked about some of your reservations about anything associated with OpenAI, understanding the big picture implications, hopefully it would make people maybe think twice about signing up for something rogue that they might have not thought about in the past.
Yes, definitely. We as the gatekeepers that I said before, we kind of have a responsibility to look at the organization holistically, right? A lot of us get to see things that this division doesn't see, and we kind of have the idea and the opportunity to protect our organizations before it gets to the point where, oh man, there's a breach, or oh man,
Yeah.
this data is supposed to get out there, right? Because I know when Joe from finance bought this thing, right? Because I may see it in
It's
an
always
empty
Joe from
store.
finance buying that thing. Honest
Yeah,
to
Joe from
goodness,
finance.
Joe.
Honestly, it's usually some developer that bought it. I'm just trying not to be on the developers' backs. I yell at them enough. Um, but this thing gets purchased, and then you now have to chase to
Yeah.
understand your risk proposition, right? How exposed are you? How bad is this that Joe from
Yeah.
finance, this thing that he bought? Um, and then you have to go out and amend contracts. You
Yeah.
have to go and find linked URL terms that somebody signed up for, get that
Yeah.
over to your legal department or something like that. And then you have to call the vendor. Hey, listen, I know you just signed this thing. I'm
Yeah.
going to need you to amend the contract because you've got my data in there.
Yeah.
Is it identified? How are you using it? All of that stuff you have to find out and then re-engage. Whereas if Joe had called you 6 months ago, you could have had all this stuff done.
Joe. Now, David, you've been super sharing of your expertise today, and we've all gotten to benefit from the fact that you truly have been focused on IT procurement for quite a while. A lot of procurement teams and specific practitioners don't actually have the option to specialize in a category, and you sort of get assigned categories on a seniority basis, round robin basis. Maybe 3 years ago you managed something IT related. If someone is not dedicated to IT spend but wants to make sure that their knowledge is keeping up, do you have any advice around professional development, places to go for expertise, ways to stay sort of plugged into the trend so that even if you're not dedicated to this category spend, you're sort of up to speed enough to be able to ask those good questions and think in a way that is risk averse when it comes to organizational data?
Um, so as a tech geek, I live a different life. Like I read MIT Technology Review like for fun. Like these are the things that I deal with on a regular basis. But if you get to the understanding that data exists that need to be protected throughout your entire life, your
Yeah.
Alexa at home, your customer information at the doctor's office, and my Alexa is now yelling at me. Um, if you take that mindset of protecting your personal data, your personal
Mhm.
information into your negotiations with your suppliers, and think about your company data the same way you would think about your data. If you were throwing away your credit card, your old credit card, you cut it up, right?
Yep.
So you want your data to be segmented or masked or de-identified. I don't know how many, I'm going to date myself. Like when I used to throw away checks, I used to black out my account numbers on the checks
Yep.
a long time ago. Sorry. Um, that's masking data, right?
Yeah.
those are the conversations that you want to have. But you have to, like, websites like CNET, ZDNet. There are a million people on YouTube that talk about technology, and some of it is personal technology, but some of the concepts
Yeah.
are transferable to what you want to do for business. Now, cybersecurity is a whole different animal.
Yeah.
There are you get very technical in the cybersecurity world, right? You need to know what a container is, or something like that for certain parts of it. Um, LinkedIn Learning has a bunch of cyber fundamental trainings. They're like 4 hours long. They discuss things like attack surface management, kind of give you the vernacular so you can talk to your cyber team about securing your data. Yeah, that's kind of the two that I think of that comes off the top of my head.
No, I think that's great. And David, I actually have to say, you've made me feel better because while I didn't read those InfoSec questionnaire responses, I'm very good about cutting up my credit cards. And there's just something about putting my fingerprint in the phone that like never quite worked for me. So I think what you're saying is there's a natural leap, just like we try to manage corporate spend responsibly, like we would manage our own budget, our own credit card statement. If we try to think in that same way, we're probably at least headed in the right direction.
Exactly.
David, you've been so flexible today. Thank you for being generous with the information. Thank you for being laid back about a platform switch. I really appreciate you being with us. And I also appreciate everybody who has now joined us and is watching live on LinkedIn, or who is checking out this recording on demand. We have one more session today. In just a few minutes, James Meets and Philip Ideson are going to be back up on stage to take us down to the countdown to the procurement team of 2030. So give us 5 minutes. We will be right back here to wrap up the event.